Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Candid Coffee. I took a little break, but I have a very special guest here with me today, Deanna Boyadjyan. She's been my friend for a very long time, and I'm so happy to have her on the show. She will be discussing alcohol and substance abuse. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and we're going to learn a lot about the type of work she does and the type of people that she helps on a daily basis. Deanna, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So happy you're here.
I am too.
She came in from the OC, and I get to see her every once in a while when she's back in Burbank. She is a Burbank native, but
Go Bulldogs.
Yeah. She moved out for work, and I'm so happy that she took the time to come here today to my house, and so we can do this episode with her today. So Deanna, I know that you've had kind of an odd string of jobs in the past. I have too. And then you decided to go to school and pursue becoming a therapist.
Yeah.
Tell me how you came to that and what made you really go for it.
It's quite interesting how I ended up being a social worker, and everybody usually asks me, like, how did you end up in this field? I feel like it picked me. I was actually going to school for nursing, and so while doing that and doing all my prereqs, I definitely have a love for the human body and how it works, and I became really passionate about it and decided to go into public health. And so my undergrad's in public health education, and so I have this belief where if you ask anybody, you know, to tell you about how to make a donut or your phone, and they can dissect it and put it right back and tell you how everything works. But then when you ask them about how the human body works or how the human mind works, and, you know, how are your kidneys working? And they're like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I became really passionate about women's health and the reproductive system, which then led me to creating an organization where we were helping women of the underserved population where they weren't documented or they didn't have any insurance to get mammograms and screenings. And I had my friend who was actually going to USC as a social worker at the time saying, you know, what you're doing is social work, right? And I'm like, oh, what's that? And we get I think it's misconstrued. Like if somebody says, like, oh, she doesn't like something.
These are her therapy dogs, by the way.
Yeah.
This is Pasha and Phoebe, and he goes to work with Deanna sometimes as a therapy dog, and he provides a lot of comfort. At least I know firsthand because I've known these dogs for quite some time, but it's so nice to have them here with us on our show. They kind of go everywhere with Deanna, so they're part of the show today. You have to be good.
That's
I
nice.
know.
Yeah.
She's like, okay.
She just realized some of the equipment. And so, as I was saying, I think every time I say, like, social worker, if people don't know exactly what I do, they instantly think like baby snatcher, you know. It's not what we do.
Yeah.
Not all the time. And I actually went to school at USC, but in San Diego, and there was a major military population there. And I was fascinated by it, and I kind of went all in, and my concentration ended up being mental health and military. And so I'm really passionate about your well-being mentally.
Of course, it's so important.
I feel like that was super long-winded.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. You have to kind of talk about how you got there. You know, you don't just, you know, wake up one morning and decide to do what you're doing. It's very specific, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and it's especially, I think, for us Armenians. I mean, when I told my mom, who's known you for so long, oh, Deanna's going to school for this, and this is the path she chose as opposed to nursing, which you originally wanted to do, they're like, oh, wow, you know, what made her do that? In general, people, especially in our culture, they're a little bit, you know, a little ignorant about it. They don't know the type of work that you do, the different avenues you can go into. So that's mainly the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, is because I know your work because you've told me about it and I've learned from you, and I love it and I'm fascinated by it, and I think it's so helpful. But I love that I have this platform, even though it's not that big, but it does get through to many people who take some interest in the title when we're going to be, doing a trailer. They're like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me hear a little bit more about that so I can be mindful. That's my goal, to be mindful and to kind of showcase that to everybody.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up that point, because even now when I speak to people, or if I told my parents, like, I'm seeing a therapist, they're like, why,
Yeah.
That's not why we see therapists. And I don't only see geesh people. That's not what it is. It's about anybody who wants to really work on themselves, because that's where it begins from, really. I think the anxiety, the depression, and everybody has this idea of what it's supposed to look like, but it's nothing close to it. And we have these stereotypes, and you could be, completely put together, but inside you're numb and you don't feel anything, and you don't care what you eat, and you don't have an appetite, and you want to stay in bed, and that's that's depression. And but you can't label that just by looking at somebody. And I think it takes way more than just like pills that the doctor might prescribe. It's work that we all have to put into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned, doctors prescribing or diagnosing their patients for physical problems, or maybe they do see some sort of a mental, emotional thing going on, and they'll refer you. As a therapist, what are some signs that you look out for, or questions that you ask in order to diagnose your clients or patients?
There's a ton. There's an entire book of questions and criteria which someone has to meet in order for me to diagnose them. And so when it comes down to the questions in regards to substance use, there's a couple of them. There's about 10, I think roughly 10 questions that you would ask, but it's anywhere along the lines of, have you taken the substance in larger amounts that you meant to? If it's a yes or a no. Have you ever wanted to stop using or cut down the substance, but you weren't able to manage to? Have you spent a lot of time getting or using the substance? Have you had cravings for the substance? Have you not managed to do what you should at work or at home or at school because of the substance use? Like, does it get in the way?
Spending time with your loved ones.
Right. And these are simply yes and no questions. Have you continued to use even when it causes problems in relationships? Have you given up important social and occupational or recreational activities because of the substance use? Were you once a great tennis player and now you're not playing tennis because your substance use is more important? Have you used substances again and again, even when it puts you in danger? For example, DUIs, any kind of domestic violence.
Just being under the influence and not
just
being
being
there.
under the influence and being of danger. Have you continued to use despite having a condition that could be worsened by that drug use, which is like if you have a health problem and if you keep drinking, it makes it worse, but it doesn't matter because drinking is more important. Have you, do you need more of the substance to get the same effect? Meaning, has your tolerance increased? So maybe one glass of coffee does nothing for me. I'm gonna need more glasses of coffee to get the effect that one glass of coffee would give.
Used to give me.
And so that has that built, yes or no? With that, just simply, if I'm able to ask those questions, it's 2 to 3 is a mild substance use disorder. 4 to 5 guesses is a moderate substance abuse disorder, and then 6 or more is severe. And this could be anything in terms of like coffee, alcohol, drugs, heroin, video games, love and sex addiction. Like all of that is all under abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know too much about these video games or things like that people don't take as seriously. Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure it could be labeled, it could be under that umbrella, because it does anything that takes over your life to the point where you are not
social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you're not functioning normally, you're not going to work anymore, or you are going to work, but your mind is completely somewhere else, or you get off early just to go get a fix, whatever that fix may be. You know, that's just, it's the reality now. And I think it's become so many more categories of substance or of influence in your life that's completely derailing you. You know?
Oh yeah, we can get derailed by all kinds of things in our lives. You know, whether it's a death, a job loss, relationship problems. So actually, one of the number one reasons for relapse for people in recovery is relationship failures.
Right. Which are kind of inevitable sometimes, they happen a lot because that other person is so tired of, you know, dealing with it, or they have been dealing with it for a long time and they've kind of given up, and then that person feels more lonely again, so they go towards a drug or an alcohol to comfort themselves.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many factors that come into, you know, whether it's depression or the anxiety and the substance use. It's like your relationship. We could be codependent. I mean, I could sit here for hours, and I know we don't have hours, but we can, you know, are we codependent in a relationship and we completely lose ourselves? And then are we able to really like have self-care? What, you know, it's so important to have self-care too. And it's not about being selfish, and it's not about like the bubble baths you're supposed to give yourself with self-care and get your nails done. But self-care also is in the same category of like, go to the doctors, make your dentist appointment, go get your physical, go see a therapist, you know, go see your psychiatrist, whatever it is, to sometimes do the things that we don't want to do, but it's taking care of ourselves. That's what self-care really is about.
Yeah, and people usually just go to the doctor when they have some sort of a pain or issue they want to talk about, but they don't think, well, maybe just as even a consultation, I can go see a therapist. And it doesn't have to be for prescribing a drug to you. It could just be an unbiased person sitting there and talking to you about something that you didn't even understand that you were dealing with, and you have an aha moment, and which is what every therapist, you know, goes for. Wants to have. I know with like a little bit of an older generation, like for example, our parents' generation are a little bit older, if they have a gambling problem or a drinking problem, with a lot of people who are older do, especially if it's genetically passed down. But can you talk a little bit about how parents can deal with their sons and daughters, or, you know, other close family members who are maybe younger, who are more impressionable and influenced more easily by drugs and alcohol through their peers, or just somebody on the street, or word of mouth, or whatever it may be, just something they could, something that can help them understand it better and be able to deal with it better?
I think one of the biggest factors, and I know that I've definitely been guilty of this way before I was in my field. And I think it's, you know, the immediate reaction and the immediate response of, how could you? You're the worst, and I'm so disappointed in you. And that's not the questions and the statements that we really need to give these people who are suffering with substance use. The main factor and the main question that I ask is why. We get down to why. Why did you use?
Why did you even begin to use?
What led you to using? Because it could be as simple as, you know, it wasn't until I asked a question, well, why do you do this? And I got a response that, you know, from someone who's very near and dear to me, and was like, well, Dee, I feel loved when I do it. I'm like, wait, what? And it's like a warm sensation that comes over you, and I feel whole and complete. And
which is not the answer you were waiting for.
No,
Yeah.
you know, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, and it's sad because now, like, then I feel horrible. Oops. And I feel like I messed with the mic, but I feel horrible because it's not about them getting high or them getting drunk and blacked out. There's an underlying factor that comes into, and it's not about my dad was an alcoholic and my grandfather was an alcoholic, so I'm going to be an alcoholic, and that's not the case. And whether you could be more prone to alcoholism, right. However, just like you could be more prone to having cancer due to it being genetically like
passed down.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
But what do? You try to live a healthier life so that you don't get cancer. And so it's the same when it comes to, you know, alcoholism.
Right.
And I think that it's hard getting out of it because it's the underlying factor of where did it come from, what happened. It didn't just start overnight. It could have started early from our childhood. And I think the other thing that I think now we're getting better at it and we're informing and I think we're much more informed as a society and culturally. But it's not about, you know, the child's 5 and they don't understand. Everything really affects the child from, you know, gestation till birth, till well into your
adolescent years.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel like, the hardest.
Yeah. And your brain's not fully developed. Like the frontal cortex isn't fully developed until you're 25. So imagine using drugs, let's say at 15 or at 12 or at 17, where it's stunting the front. And what we do in the front is actually it's the higher level of thinking. It's the consequences, like, oh, if I do this, this is going to happen. And it so happens, like, you know, when we're younger and like we're teenagers and I feel
untouchable.
Like, yeah. And I feel like every parent's been like, oh, well, if Bob jumps off of a cliff, are you like, are you going to do everything your friends do? And you're like, yeah, sure, that's great, you know? And we're not thinking of the consequences. And then later on, when you're finally fully developed, I remember telling my mom, because I was a huge like thrill seeker and I love going and riding roller coasters, and my mom would always be so scared and she's like, no, don't go. I'm like, nothing's gonna happen. And then fast forward to me being older and going in and I stood there and I'm like, dude, one person needs to not screw a bolt on right, and oh my god, you know, and all of a sudden the thought process there, and I'm like, I never thought of this when I was younger. I was like, yeah, let's get on, let's write it. And that's the process of like, we don't, they're not thinking about the consequences. They're teenagers. It's the thrill of the moment. They're like, it's gonna be fun. I don't care what the consequences is. It's great, you know.
And also when they keep doing it and nothing really bad happens.
Yes, and the consequences don't happen.
Yes, exactly.
You know, so often I get teenagers and they're like, man, I've been in trouble with the law and I don't want to do this anymore and I can't do anything. I've lost everything and so they want to get back into it. And there's different approaches really. And I think it takes a team. It's not just go to therapy. It's go to therapy, do your work. And so often I think at times too, I'll have patients be like, well, you tell me what to do. You're the therapist. And I was like, I'm not going to fix you. I don't have answers. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, I don't have the answers. You do. I'm just here to
help you
pull it out.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and the thought process behind that is, how often is it like your mom tells you 1,400 times, Christine, do this, Christine, do this, and you're like, yeah, and then all of a sudden it'll click. It's only when you want it to, not necessarily want it to, but when you feel the need for that, and you're like, oh, this is what she was talking about.
Right. You understand it. And
exactly.
You accept it.
When you say it, when you feel it, it's like saying, don't touch the flames, and it's like you got to touch the flames to know what she was talking about. And it's that process in therapy that happens where I might know the answer, but I'm not going to tell you. It's way more rewarding when you figure it out and you're like, oh, I just had an aha moment. And I think as a therapist, that's one of my most favorite and rewarding moments where inside I'm doing cartwheels, where you're like, oh my God, I just realized. And you're like, yeah, I know. I knew like 4 sessions ago, but
yeah,
you know,
time is money.
I can't tell you.
Yeah, seriously.
You know, it's hard, and sometimes, I mean, I really do enjoy the work that I do, and at times, like, I'll complain because it's so, like, it's emotionally just taxing. Yeah, it is. It drains you. And there are days where, like, people are like, so what are you doing? I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody right now.
Yeah.
I need some batteries, like, to recharge. And that's me taking my self-care, you know, having, like, healthy boundaries between work and life balance. And
absolutely.
yeah, there's I think a topic I'd want to get into in terms of, like, culturally, what it looks like for us and Armenians, and there are other cultures that would be able to identify with us, but we're so enmeshed. Like, we're so in each other's lives. Like our mother-father relationships, and then it's like your morkud and your holkud and your grandma and your dad's grandma and aunt and everyone are, like, all involved in each other's lives, and it's not healthy.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount that we need to, like, balance out, where the unhealthy enmeshedness, and then there's, like, a healthy boundary, and then there's, like, a really rigid boundary. And what that does to us from, like, our young age really affects us in, like, the relationships we have with people.
Right.
You know, what kind of attachments we form. But I feel like there's so many things to talk about.
Yeah. I think now that you've mentioned that, I completely agree with you, but also the enabling.
Oh, yes.
That comes with it. And this isn't supposed to be something that we're bashing. It's something that we're maybe trying to bring awareness to, so that you can be like, wow, you know, I am a little guilty of that, or I do know somebody who was like that. And if we can just try to work on ourselves, and I know it's hard because it stems from this, like, you know, millions and millions of, like, years of, like, keeping it in the family and you know, having each other's back and being involved in each other's lives and business. I get it, but we need to set certain boundaries and maybe use that to our advantage, in the sense of, like, let's get together and try to help this person that's dealing with something that's very hard for us to talk about. And amota, to some degree, in your opinion, not in my opinion or yours, because we're a little bit more forward thinking, but yet it could take a full effort of the family to help this person. Do it. Talk about it. Don't hide behind it and say, oh, I don't want to bring it up. I'd rather kind of cover it up, or talk about it in another way, or two family members talk about it, but they don't bring it up to the person.
Oh, yeah.
Just let's use our family values that we do have, that's so deeply rooted, to help instead of enable our kids that are growing up.
Oh, yeah.
The younger generation. We're the same age. We're in our 30s, but, like, teens and early 20s and things like that. It's such a difficult time for them, and they're so, like you said, it's not developed over here that much. They're very impressionable. They're very easily influenced. They can be lost very easily. And so I just wanted to, you know, talk about that, because I feel like if more and more people talk about it the way we are, it'll happen less and less, because you're talking about it, because you're bringing it up. You're saying something that's extremely difficult for you to talk about, but it's going to help. Because had someone talked to you about it prior to you having that problem that escalated too quickly, maybe you would have
sought out help if it was more acceptable.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so often I think it's just, again, it goes into, like, instead of being in that weird, awkward, I shouldn't talk about it, aman amota, you know, sense lini. It's not that. It's more of, you know, how can I help you? You know, how can I help you? And you got to ask them, like, they'll be able to tell. They might say, I don't know, but I need help. I don't know.
What about someone who's saying, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with me.
Well, they're in denial.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and there's a lot of us that are in denial, because also we can't, you know, it's like, well, I can't say that I'm addicted to the drugs. I can't say, you know, I've been spending thousands of dollars on my heroin addiction. Nobody knows I'm functioning, because that can happen too. You can definitely go to work and be a fully functioning alcoholic, make 6 figures, and come home and down bottles of wine or hard liquor, whatever your choice is, and get back up and go to work tomorrow. Do it again tomorrow. But it's not that. It's, you know, what do you want to do? How do you want to change your life? And there's that underlying factor. I think when it comes to parents or family, again, it comes down to like the acceptance and that the stereotypes that we've like grown up with, in terms of like, you can't come home late. What are the neighbors going to think? And it's like, why are the neighbors up? You know what I mean? And it's like, well, what is your aunt going to think? And you're like, why does my aunt have to know right now? Like, I'm telling you as a parent, I need you to be in my corner. And it's not about other people.
Yes. That's a good way of putting it.
You know? Like, seriously, what's the neighbor doing up at 2?
Yeah. No, it's definitely being in that person's corner, as painful as it may be to deal with a loved one who's going through that. There will be times of denial. There will be times of, I don't even want to talk about it. Stay out of my business. It's none of your concern. But I think that just keeping that door open, that conversation open, and constantly going back at it. And I can't speak from experience. Most people, if they're watching this, they'll say, well, you don't know what it's like. You haven't been there. I don't, but I'm extremely receptive and understanding, and at least something that you can say that someone's watching that has dealt with it, or may, hopefully not, but if they do deal with it in the future, they can kind of remember what you're saying and kind of have a better understanding about it.
Yeah, I think in any case, like you mentioned, it's just about, you don't have to, you know, pound someone down for it or just keep harping, but to also let someone know that you're a safe person, a safe place, that whenever they do need help, even if they're in denial, to be like, all right, cool. But whenever you do want help, let me know. And I think that is always like a little voice that will play inside their head to be like, hey, they said that I can, you know, talk to me no matter what. I mean, I think I've told my cousins, and like, I know you might not be able to talk to your parents, but please, like, you can call me and talk to me and let me know if you're having problems. Like, I know there's lots of drugs out there, and it's completely normal. And I think that that's another factor that's like, oh my God, I'm not normal, or I'm so weird and I'm different. It's totally normal to feel that way, or to be like, I just want to try it once, you know?
It's the self-control.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's we can't live in la la land and think that it's not easily acceptable, or that we're not curious to try it. Yes, people are curious to try it, but you have to have boundaries. You have to have some self-control. And if you didn't, and it kind of got out of hand, there is a lot of ways that you can get back on your feet. Rehab, yes, but also before you even get to rehab, talking to your family members, coming to terms with yourself, accepting it, and really trying to get your life together. And it really affects me when I have heard and seen young 18, 19, 20, barely 21, like, you had your whole life ahead of you to go through something like that, especially in our community. And it's so hush-hush, and we try not to talk about it and bring it up because we're so embarrassed, and we're so hurt, and we feel helpless that we couldn't help our loved ones in whatever way. And I'm sure every parent and relative have felt that, but it's just so important to put it on the table and talk about it, and be aware. And don't be in denial, and ask questions, and know who their friends are, and know where they're going. They'll probably be cursing you, but it's for the good. Eventually, when they're old enough, I didn't start appreciating everything my parents had done and said and worried about until like 25, 26, when I was, you know, already mature enough to appreciate it. And now I have kids, I appreciate it even more, but that's a different story. Anything else you want to add, Deanna? Any helpful information?
Actually, one of my favorite things to do is when people are like, well, where do I get a therapist from? Or, you know, there's a great tool. It's Psychology Today. And on there, you can find therapists, you can find psychiatrists, you can find support groups and treatment centers. And it's a great website where you just type in your zip code and it literally puts in a whole bunch of therapists in your area. And it's kind of like a dating website type, you know, so you get their whole bio, what kind of insurance they take, where they're located, what days they work, and what they work on, their specialties, because there's different types of therapy. And so that's always one of my favorite things to do, and that's Psychology Today. And we can add the little link
on the bottom.
Right? And then, of course, there's going to be a link for suicide prevention and addiction. So you can just call it anonymously, and if you need any help, they'll help you out.
So Dee, my question is, you know, what's the difference between you being a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist?
Well, the psychotherapist, I don't prescribe medication. So I do a lot of different types of therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. There's different types. There's problem solving, motivational interviewing. So we have different types of evidence-based practices that we use in terms of therapy. And then the psychiatrist is the one who actually prescribes medication. So that's one of our major differences between us, along with schooling. My tools are different types of therapy that we use. And one of the ones that I mentioned was cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's really using our thought process to change our behavior. So we change our thought process to then change our behaviors. And that takes a lot of, that's not done with medication.
Right. Takes a lot of time in therapy. And if you did have a client or a patient that needed, because you thought in your professional capacity that this person might be schizophrenic or something like that, then you would refer to a psychiatrist.
I would refer them to a psychiatrist.
Being your friend for almost 18, 19 years, you have been a therapist for me way before you even became LCSW. And I love that about you because it's kind of in you. You've always had that about you, and you've been never any judgment, very unbiased, very, you know, devil's advocate, very understanding. And now that you're officially have that professional title, you know, what's it like having family and friends? Is it like being a dentist and everyone's like, hey, you know, can you check my tooth?
Yeah.
Everybody running to you with their problems?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And then like, it's like, you know, they'll call you, well, you're the professional, why don't you tell me what to do? And I'm like, no, I'm not getting paid for this right now. And it's, again, it's like a burden, or like, and not in a bad way, but I think we don't realize when we do that, you know? It's like, oh, you're a hairdresser, like, Mazda Sponsorov, you know? Like, and it's like, no,
or
I'm
getting
not,
free legal advice from your friends.
Getting free legal advice, and that's not the case, because especially what I do, and when it comes to family, that's one thing is like a no. I'm not here to therapize family. It's not my job. My job is to be a family member and
just be Deanna,
just
who's
be
listening.
Deanna, and not, you know, Deanna the social worker, you know, the licensed clinical social worker, and I'm not Deanna the therapist at home or with my friends. Or I think when I first meet people too, and they're like, you're a therapist? And I'm like, yeah. And all of a sudden they like start pulling back with like information they start feeding me, you know? And they're like, are you analyzing me right now? I'm like, no, dude, I'm not at work. I need to use my brain for that. I'm not there yet. No, that's not what I'm doing. But you know, every now and then I'm like, that's interesting. How does that make you feel? you know? And they're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say
And
that?
she's like, I'm diagnosing you right now.
I know, keep talking, I'm diagnosing you. You know.
Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, it comes with the good and the bad.
It comes with the territory.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I have to like tell people. I'm like, you know, I'm not, maybe you should talk to somebody about that. And they're like, oh.
I can give you a number.
Yeah, I can give you a number and you can talk to them and
Yeah.
you know, or I think I've now developed that when someone starts telling me something, I'm like, sounds like you probably do you have a therapist? You need, you know.
Yeah.
And they're like, but you're a therapist. I'm like, no, I'm not doing this for you
Clocked
because
out
yeah,
like 2 hours ago.
Either I'm going to be your therapist and we're no longer going to be friends.
Yeah.
Or I could be your friend and you can go see somebody else. Yeah. And, you know.
I can't imagine with like our shurjapat how that pans out because they don't really, they're just like, but see, listen, there's this thing I wanted to tell you.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, they don't.
No, I'm not asking for advice.
I'm not asking for advice, but what do you think I should do?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, see a therapist?
Yeah.
I wasn't listening. You know? No, I was. I just, it's you know, it's kind of like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like, and if I give you advice and I tell you that you've got a personality disorder, like, how are you going to be my friend? How are you going to take that? You know, it's harder for me to be like, oh, maybe you should ease up on the drinking, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, all of a sudden, you know, they get defensive.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. You know, I think the best ones is like when they're like, hey, I think I have a problem. I'm like, yeah. They're like, did you know? I'm like, I did. Like, why didn't you say anything? I was like, I was just waiting for you to be ready. Yeah. And then I think that's a lot more like fluid and they're like, what should I do? And I'm like, here you go. Look for therapists. Let me know how it goes. Yeah.
Nice. That's actually, I mean, all jokes aside, like when someone actually comes and says, this is what's happening and I've come to the realization of X, Y, and Z, and you're like, good. So now this transition will be easier instead of me saying something to you and they're like, I'm not like that, blah, blah, blah.
It's like pulling teeth.
Yeah, very cool. Before we wrap up, thank you to everyone who's been watching this far and to all my followers on Instagram. When I told you I was going to take a break, this is why. So I could be better prepared. This is Dream Donuts, and we have a variety of flavors here, and this is the like Middle Eastern one with the like pistachio and that delicious cream. And Deanna and I are gonna try it, and I'll have their information on the bottom. It's a truck. Obviously, they go around. They do catering, and they go to different locations. It's really delicious. I've had them before. We give it a try.
Yummy! I love donuts.
All right, everybody, that concludes this episode of Candid Coffee with Deanna Boyadjyan, licensed clinical social worker. I got it right. And I'm so happy she was here with me today to share her story a little bit. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.